My husband filed for divorce and said, "I'm leaving for someone else. You won't get a thing." I just smiled and signed every page. He celebrated for a week, but when he saw the signed documents, Good day, dear listeners. It's Diana again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please subscribe to my channel and like this video, and also let me know in the comments which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. I built that life with my own hands, not metaphorically, literally. I was the one who stayed up until 2 in the morning during our first years together, balancing spreadsheets on the kitchen table, while Daniel slept peacefully in the next room. I was the one who took the second job when his landscaping business nearly collapsed in 2014. I was the one who found the house on Mercer Lane, negotiated the price down by $11,000, and repainted every single room that first summer because we couldn't afford contractors. My name is Claire Harmon. I was 38 years old when my husband handed me a manila envelope across our kitchen table and told me our marriage was over. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before that Tuesday morning, I had considered us, by any ordinary measure, a stable family. Daniel and I had been married for 14 years. We had a daughter, Lily, who was 12 and obsessed with marine biology. We had a golden retriever named Biscuit who shed on everything. We had a mortgage with 9 years left on it, a joint savings account, and a standing Friday dinner reservation at Carmine's on 5th. We had, I believed, a life. Daniel ran his landscaping company, Harmon and Green, though there was no green, he just liked the sound of it, and I worked as a senior project manager at an architectural firm downtown. My salary had quietly become the backbone of our household income, especially after Daniel's business partner left in 2019, and the company never quite recovered its momentum. I didn't resent that. Marriage is a long game, and I had always played it as one. The first signal came in October. I noticed it the way you notice a draft in a house, not all at once, but as a persistent chill you can't quite locate. Daniel started keeping his phone face down, not occasionally, always. He'd been informal with his phone for years, leaving it on the counter, tossing it on the couch. Suddenly it was always in his pocket, always screen down, always password locked. I told myself it was nothing. Men are private. People change habits. Then came November. He started working late on Thursdays. Daniel's business had never required Thursday evenings. Landscaping is a daytime profession, and the administrative side, what little there was, he usually handled on Monday mornings with a cup of coffee and a legal pad. But suddenly, there were Thursday client consultations, a new account in Riverside, a commercial property out past the highway that needed constant attention. I asked once, casually, if I could see the contract. He said he hadn't printed it yet. I filed that away. The geography of our house changed, too. There's a particular intimacy to 14 years of marriage. You know exactly how a person moves through a shared space. You know the sounds they make, the patterns, the rhythms. Daniel and I had always watched television together on the couch after Lily went to bed, his feet in my lap, my hand resting on his ankle without either of us thinking about it. By December, he was watching from the armchair. By January, he was going to bed before me. I was not a suspicious woman by nature. I had never been the kind of wife who checked receipts or questioned mileage, but I was a project manager. My entire professional life was built on pattern recognition, on noticing when something was off schedule, off budget, off plan, and something was very, very off. The woman's name, I would later learn, was Mara. She was 31. She did social media consulting, which Daniel apparently found impressive. She'd met him at a trade expo in September, the same trade expo I had helped him register for, the hotel room I had booked on my credit card, the overnight bag I had packed for him because he always forgot to bring enough socks. But I didn't know any of that yet on the Tuesday morning in February when I came downstairs to find Daniel already dressed, standing at the kitchen table, a manila envelope in front of him like a prop in a play he'd been rehearsing. He didn't look guilty. That was the thing that stayed with me longest afterward. He looked resolved, almost relieved. "I want a divorce," he said. "I'm leaving. I'm in love with someone else." He pushed the envelope across the table. "You're not going to get anything, Claire. I've talked to my lawyer. Sign these and we can make this clean." I looked at the envelope. I looked at him. And then, I don't entirely know why, perhaps because 14 years of managing impossible situations had made me very good at not showing my hand. I smiled. Not a cruel smile, not a broken one, just a quiet, knowing smile that seemed to unsettle him more than tears would have. "Okay," I said. I pulled the envelope toward me. "Let me read through these." He clearly hadn't expected that. I didn't read them at the table. I took the envelope upstairs, sat on the edge of our bed, my side, the left side, the side I'd slept on for 14 years, and placed it on my knees without opening it for a full 10 minutes. Below me, I could hear Daniel moving around the kitchen, the familiar sounds of him pouring coffee, opening the refrigerator, closing it again. Normal sounds, domestic sounds, the sounds of a man who felt he had already won. That was when the fear arrived. It came in quietly, the way it always does, not as panic, but as arithmetic. I started adding things up. The house on Mercer Lane was worth, at current market, somewhere between $400,000 and $430,000. We had paid off nearly 40% of the mortgage. That was equity. Our joint savings account held $62,000, the result of years of careful, deliberate saving, much of it during periods when my salary was the only reliable income. Daniel's business, even diminished, held equipment, vehicles, and a client roster that represented real value. There was my 401k, which I had been contributing to since I was 24. Daniel's lawyer, whoever they were, had drafted documents designed to make all of this disappear. I finally opened the envelope. The papers were exactly what I feared. A no-fault divorce filing, which was standard in our state, but the asset division attached to it was not standard at all. It proposed that the house be sold and proceeds split, which sounded fair until you read the fine print, which structured the split in a way that accounted for a business loan. Daniel claimed I owed him from 2016. I had no memory of any such loan. The savings account would be divided equally, which on its surface seemed reasonable. But there was no accounting for the fact that the majority of those contributions had come from my paycheck during the years his business ran at a loss. His business was listed as having a current market value of $40,000. I knew enough about small business valuation to know that number was almost certainly fabricated. A landscaping company with established client contracts, equipment, and a vehicle fleet was worth considerably more. He wanted me to sign these papers, and he expected me to do it quickly, while I was still shocked. I set the papers down on the nightstand. Here is what I knew about myself at that moment. I was afraid. I was genuinely, physically afraid. Not of Daniel, but of the future. Of raising Lily half-time in a house I might have to sell. Of starting over at 38. Of having given 14 years to something and walking away with a fraction of what I'd built. But I also knew something else about myself. I had managed multi-million-dollar construction projects. I had navigated contractor disputes, zoning appeals, and client breakdowns. I had learned, over the course of a long career, that the person who panics first almost always loses. Daniel expected tears. He expected either a breakdown or an immediate capitulation. He was going to get neither. I took out a legal pad, the same kind Daniel used for his Monday morning business notes, and I began to write, not emotionally, methodically. First, I needed my own attorney, not a general practice lawyer, not a friend's recommendation, a certified divorce attorney with specific experience in asset division and business valuation disputes. I had heard the name Karen Okafor mentioned at the firm. She was a family law attorney who had helped one of our architects through a complicated divorce 2 years prior. I wrote her name down. Second, I needed a full financial inventory before I signed anything. Every account, every asset, every liability, documented. Daniel had been the one who handled most of the business finances, and I realized, with cold clarity, that I had allowed a gap in my knowledge to form there. That gap needed to close immediately. Third, I needed to understand what that business was actually worth. His number of 40,000 felt like a number chosen specifically to minimize what I might be entitled to. Fourth, and this was the part of the plan that required the most patience, I needed to not signal any of this. Daniel believed the papers were being signed. He was celebrating, probably. He was telling Mara, whoever she was, that it was done, that I had folded, that he was free. I was going to let him believe that for exactly as long as it served me. I went back downstairs. Daniel was still in the kitchen. I put the envelope on the counter beside the coffee maker and I said calmly, "I'll need a few days to look these over." He looked surprised, then slightly impatient. "Claire, this doesn't have to be complicated." "It isn't complicated," I said. "I just want to read what I'm signing. That's reasonable." He couldn't argue with that, not out loud. I went to work that morning, sat at my desk on the 14th floor of a glass building downtown, looked out at the city and thought, he has no idea what he just started. Karen Okafor's office was on the 3rd floor of a building 6 blocks from mine, which struck me later as convenient in the way that only necessary things can be. I called on a Wednesday morning from the parking garage beneath my office building, where I knew the signal was poor and no one came to smoke or make personal calls. I explained the situation in the same tone I used to brief architects on problematic sites: factual, sequential, without drama. Karen's assistant scheduled me for Friday afternoon. I did not tell Daniel. Those 2 days between the call and the appointment were, in some ways, the hardest of the entire ordeal. I had to continue living in the house on Mercer Lane as though nothing had shifted. I made dinner. I helped Lily with a science project about tide pools. I walked Biscuit in the evenings. Daniel moved around the periphery of our household like a man waiting for a transaction to complete, present but already mentally elsewhere, looking at his phone with an expression I had seen before, but only now understood. On Friday, Karen Okafor shook my hand, offered me coffee, and did not waste either of our time with sympathy I hadn't asked for. She was in her mid-50s, precise in the way that good lawyers tend to be, with reading glasses she used as a kind of punctuation, putting them on to look at documents, removing them to look at me. She reviewed Daniel's proposed settlement in about 12 minutes. "This is aggressive," she said, which I had already concluded. "The business valuation is almost certainly understated. The loan claim from 2016. Do you have any documentation supporting that you borrowed money from his business?" "None," I said, "because it didn't happen." "Then it's a fabrication, and we'll treat it as such." She put her glasses back on. "Here's what I want you to do. I need complete financial records. Joint accounts, your individual accounts, retirement accounts, any documentation you have access to regarding his business. Don't move money, don't close accounts. Just document." "I know," I said. I've already started." She looked at me over her glasses with what I think was the beginning of professional respect. She also said something that reframed everything. In this state, assets acquired during the marriage are marital property regardless of whose name they're in, including business growth. If his company has grown in value during your marriage, even using funds you provided during lean years, that growth is arguable marital property. I thought about 2014, the second job, the months I had transferred money into the business account to cover payroll. "I have those transfer records," I said. Karen allowed herself a small smile. "Good." The evidence arrived not from a private investigator or a dramatic confrontation. It arrived from a cloud backup. Daniel and I had, years ago, set up a shared photo backup service for family pictures. It was connected to both our phones and auto-synced to an account we'd created for Lily's early childhood photos and family vacations. Neither of us had thought about it in years. I certainly hadn't. But when I opened it late that Sunday night, searching, I told myself, for a specific photo of the house's original condition for our insurance file, I found the shared folder had been updating all along. Among the photos synced from Daniel's phone in the previous 4 months were 17 pictures I was not meant to see. Restaurant dinners at places Daniel had told me he was meeting clients. A weekend in a lakeside rental in October. The same weekend he'd told me he was attending a supplier conference. A photo of Mara. I recognized her from a single glimpse of her face in one image, though I hadn't known her name yet. Laughing at a table, Daniel's hand visible at the edge of the frame. Timestamps, locations. I copied every file to an external drive. I noted the dates, cross-referenced them against my own calendar, against the Thursday evenings, the late returns, the conference that had never happened. I sat in the kitchen at 11:30 on a Sunday night with a cup of tea I'd forgotten to drink, looking at 4 months of systematic deception laid out in a folder on my laptop, and I felt something settle in my chest, like weight becoming anchor. The fear was still there. But now there was something underneath it, something colder and far more useful. He had lied. Repeatedly, specifically, documentably. He had done so while asking me to sign away 14 years of contribution to a settlement designed to benefit him. I saved everything a second time. Then I called Karen Okafor's personal number, which she had given me for urgency. "I have documentation," I said when she picked up. "What kind?" "Photographic, time-stamped, cross-referenceable with statements he made to me directly." There was a brief pause. "Can you come in Monday morning?" "Yes," I said. "Don't sign anything before then." "I wasn't planning to," I said. I closed the laptop. Through the kitchen window, the street was dark and quiet. The house on Mercer Lane held its nighttime sounds, the hum of the refrigerator, biscuits settling on his bed in the hallway, the distant sound of Lily turning over in her sleep. This was my house, my daughter's house, my 14 years, and I had just found the lever. Karen filed our formal response on a Wednesday morning in late February. It was not a counteroffer. It was a comprehensive contestation of the asset valuation, of the fictitious 2016 loan, of every number Daniel's attorney had submitted. It included, as a supporting exhibit, a financial timeline I had spent the better part of 2 weeks compiling. Every transfer I had made from my personal account into the business during the difficult years, every mortgage payment traceable to my paycheck during the stretches when Daniel's revenue had been insufficient, a professional business valuation I had quietly commissioned from a certified appraiser named Roy Finch, who put Harmon & Green's current market value at $112,000, nearly 3 times Daniel's stated figure. We also included the documentation from the cloud backup, not as an emotional argument, but as legal evidence of deception relevant to the settlement negotiation. In our state, fault does not alter property division, but evidence of ongoing deception during settlement discussions is admissible to establish bad faith. Daniel's lawyer called Karen before noon. The call, by Karen's account, was heated. Daniel himself called me at 2 p.m. on my cell phone while I was at my desk. I let it go to voicemail. He called again at 2:15. I let that go too. At 2:30, I listened to both messages. The first was controlled. He said we needed to talk, that I was making things complicated unnecessarily, that he had a lawyer, and I should let the lawyers handle this without involving that kind of documentation. The second message was less controlled. He said I had gone through his private property. He said I was trying to destroy him. He said if I thought this was going to end well for me, I was mistaken. He used a word I won't repeat, and then he caught himself and said he was sorry. It was stress, but that I needed to understand that he had people who would testify to my behavior during the marriage, that I had been cold and emotionally unavailable, and that a judge would see that. I saved both voicemails. I forwarded them to Karen. Then came Mara. I hadn't anticipated direct contact from her, and in retrospect, I should have. She was not a passive participant in this situation. She had been, from what the photographs suggested, an active and willing one. She found me, apparently, through my work LinkedIn profile. The message was long. It alternated between apologetic and aggressive in a way that suggested she had written and rewritten it several times. She said she was sorry for the pain this caused. She said Daniel had told her the marriage had been over for years, which is what they always say. She said I should consider what was best for Lily, that a prolonged legal battle would harm my daughter. She said Daniel was not the man I thought he was, either, that he had lied to both of us, and she hoped we could be, and this was the word she used, mature about the situation. The suggestion that protecting my legal rights was immature was not one I found persuasive. I did not respond to Mara. I forwarded the message to Karen and asked whether it constituted any form of interference or harassment. Karen said it was aggressive, but fell short of any actionable line, and that ignoring it entirely was the correct response. I ignored it entirely. What I had not anticipated was that Daniel would escalate to my workplace. On a Thursday, a specific Thursday, which I remember because it was raining and I had taken Lily to school in the morning and the windshield wipers had needed replacing, my manager, Paul Gessner, called me into his office. His expression was uncomfortable in a way I recognized as secondhand embarrassment. Daniel, he told me, had called the main office line and spoken to the receptionist, and then, when transferred, to Paul's assistant. He had told them, I am still somewhat astonished by this, that I was going through an emotional breakdown and might not be fit to handle my current accounts. Paul looked at me across his desk and said, I didn't believe a word of it, but I wanted you to hear it from me. I thanked him. I was calm. I was so calm, in fact, that Paul asked if I was all right, and I told him the truth, that I was going through a divorce, that my husband was upset about the legal proceedings, and that I was completely functional and professionally uncompromised. Paul nodded and said nothing would change on his end, but I called Karen from the parking garage afterward, and I told her what had happened. That, she said, is actionable. Contacting your employer with false statements designed to damage your professional standing is tortious interference and potentially defamation. She sent a formal letter to Daniel's attorney by end of business that day. The calls stopped. Mara went quiet. The legal channel was now the only channel, which was exactly where I wanted everything. I took 4 days. Not a vacation. I didn't leave the city, didn't cancel anything, but I took 4 evenings entirely for myself. I had dinner with my sister in Westfield. I took Lily to an aquarium exhibit she'd been wanting to see since November. I slept 8 hours. I sat on the back porch of the house on Mercer Lane with a glass of wine on a cold Thursday night and looked at the yard I had planted, the beds I had dug, the oak tree Lily had helped me name when she was 4, and I felt for the first time since the manila envelope something close to peace. Not victory, not yet, but the knowledge that I had not panicked, had not capitulated, had not handed 14 years away because a man across a kitchen table had said you won't get anything with the confidence of someone who had never once been seriously challenged. I was challenging him now. Daniel's attorney sent a new offer in the second week of March. Karen called me on a Tuesday afternoon to walk me through it, and I could tell from her tone, measured, clinical, that she wanted me to receive the information without reaction before we discussed it. The new proposal raised my share of the home equity, dropped the fictitious loan claim entirely, and offered a 55-45 split of the joint savings in my favor. Daniel's business was now valued, in his attorney's language, at approximately $65,000, still far below Roy Finch's independent appraisal. "He's testing you," Karen said. "I know," I said. "The loan disappearing is significant. It means they know it won't survive scrutiny." "What about the business valuation?" "Still substantially understated, and there's still no accounting for your financial contributions during the deficit years." "Then it's not enough." "No," Karen agreed. "It isn't." What made this offer insidious was not its legal structure. It was its emotional architecture. Attached to the formal document was a handwritten note from Daniel, not typed, not through the attorneys, handwritten on the stationery we had bought together at a paper shop in Vermont 4 years ago during a fall weekend trip. The stationery I recognized immediately. He wrote that he knew things had gone wrong between us, that he wasn't proud of how he'd handled the announcement, that Lily deserved parents who could be civil to each other, that he hoped we could end this with dignity, and that the new offer was evidence of his good faith. The use of Lily's name was deliberate. The handwritten format was deliberate. The Vermont stationery was either thoughtless or the most manipulative detail in the document, and I genuinely couldn't determine which. I set the note aside. I was not cold about it because I didn't feel anything. I was cold about it because I felt too much, and I had learned, over the past weeks, to treat my emotions as data rather than instructions. The note told me Daniel was anxious. The offer told me his attorney had assessed their position as weaker than initially presented. The disappearance of the loan told me they had been trying a bluff, and I had called it. I dictated my response to Karen, decline. Counter with the Finch valuation as floor, full accounting of financial contributions, and equitable division of all assets, including business growth during the marriage. Mara, during this period, was quiet in an official capacity, but I became aware, through a mutual acquaintance named Deborah, who worked in the same industry orbit, that Mara had been telling people in their shared social circle that I was dragging out the divorce out of bitterness, that I was weaponizing the legal process, that Daniel was the real victim of a woman who refused to let go. I heard this from Deborah over coffee one Saturday, delivered with the careful neutrality of someone who wanted me to know but didn't want to be involved. "Do you want me to say something to anyone?" Deborah asked. "No," I said. "Thank you for telling me." I meant it. Deborah was one of 3 people outside my immediate family who knew the full scope of what was happening, and her loyalty, uncomplicated, unasked for, meant more to me than I expressed at the time. The other two were my sister Rachel and a colleague named Priya, who had been through her own divorce 6 years prior and had become, without either of us naming it, a kind of guide. Priya did not offer advice I hadn't asked for. She checked in with brief, practical texts. "How are you sleeping? Have you eaten today? Do you need me to take Lily on Saturday?" And when I said I was fine, she believed me, which was the most useful thing anyone can do for a woman who is managing something difficult and does not want to be treated as fragile. Those 3 women formed a quiet circle around me during that month, and I didn't fully understand until much later how much that circle held me upright. I told Rachel one evening, over the phone while she was making dinner and I was sitting in my parked car outside the grocery store, that I was scared. Not of the legal outcome. I believed in the legal outcome. I was scared of what winning would actually feel like. Whether I would get to the other side of this and find that the scaffolding I'd been running on had given me no time to actually grieve. Rachel was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You'll grieve later. Right now, you're building the ground to grieve on. Keep going." I sat in the parking lot for another 10 minutes after we hung up. Then I went in and bought groceries and came home and made dinner and helped Lily with her homework and did not let any of it show on my face. That was the month I became, I think, genuinely difficult to beat. They came on a Saturday. I should have anticipated it. Looking back, the timing was not random. The following Monday was a scheduled deposition, the first formal occasion on which Daniel would be required to speak about the business finances under oath. The weekend before was the last moment for an informal approach. The doorbell rang at 11 in the morning. I was in the kitchen with Lily, who had a friend over, a girl named Sophie who lived 2 streets away. I sent them upstairs with a plate of crackers and cheese, which Lily accepted with the incurious efficiency of a child who has learned that when adults need the room, crackers are the transition mechanism. I opened the front door. Daniel was on the porch. Behind him, in the driveway, idling, was his car. He was alone. "Can I come in?" he said. He looked tired. Not guilty tired. That was behind him now. He looked strategically tired, the way people look when they have decided that looking tired will help them. "You can come to the door," I said. I did not step back. He ran a hand through his hair. "Claire, come on. Let's just talk. Not through lawyers. Like people." "We are talking," I said. "I want to sit down. I want to have a real conversation about where this is going." I looked at him for a moment. He was my husband, had been my husband. We had stood at an altar together and meant it, or at least I had, and I suspect he had too, at the time. That history was real, but it was also, I had come to understand, a history he was counting on to make me soft, to make me reasonable in the way that benefits the person asking for reasonableness. I stepped aside and let him in, not because I was softening, because I wanted to hear what he had prepared. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table. He folded his hands on the surface, a gesture I recognized from arguments over the years, a self-calming mechanism. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said. "The financial stuff, the appraiser, the contribution claims. You know this is all going to hurt Lily. A long legal fight, the money spent on attorneys." "You hired an attorney first," I said. I know that." He paused. "Mara thinks we should try to talk directly. Mara doesn't have standing in this conversation," I said. Not angrily, as a fact. Something moved across his face. He recalibrated. "You're going to spend everything we saved fighting me. Is that what you want? To destroy what we built?" I didn't come to this table with falsified valuations, I said. I didn't fabricate a 6-year-old loan. I didn't contact your employer and tell them you were having a breakdown. He went very still. Those were mistakes, he said quietly. I was under pressure. Daniel. I kept my voice level. What do you want to say to me today that couldn't be said through our attorneys? He looked at me for a long time, and then, because he had run out of the managed version, he gave me the unmanaged one. I want you to take the offer, he said, the reasonable one, before this gets worse for both of us. Worse how? I have people who will testify about your parenting, about your hours, your absences. You're going to make a custody argument, I said, not a question. I had wondered if this was coming. I'm saying there are things that could be brought up. I stood. Then bring them up, I said, through your attorney, at the deposition, on the record. I walked to the front door and opened it. I think we're done. He stood slowly. He looked at me one more time, and what I saw in his face was not anger exactly, but the expression of a man who had genuinely believed he could walk back in here and reset the board, and was now recalibrating to a reality in which that had not happened. He left. I closed the door. I stood in the hallway for a moment. My hands were steady. My breathing was steady. But underneath the steadiness there was something cold and live, fear, or something adjacent to it. He had mentioned custody. That was the word I had been carrying for weeks, like a stone in my chest, the word that could cut through all the financial logic and reach something that had nothing to do with valuations or appraisals. Lily. I breathed. I let the fear exist. And then I did what I had learned to do with fear. I didn't suppress it, and I didn't follow it. I held it still and felt how it resolved, slowly into something harder and more directional. He had threatened my daughter. Good. Now I knew exactly what I was protecting. The deposition was held on a Monday morning in a conference room on the 9th floor of a downtown office building that looked like every conference room in every office building. Beige walls, a long table, water pitchers, nobody touched. Karen and I arrived 11 minutes early. Daniel arrived exactly on time, with his attorney, a man named Brackett, who had a practiced reassurance about him that I recognized as the professional cousin of Daniel's own managed presentation. They sat across the table. Daniel didn't look at me. I looked at him steadily. I had no reason not to. I had not slept poorly the night before, which surprised me when I woke at 6 and realized it. I had expected insomnia, the particular kind that comes before consequential mornings, the replaying, the anticipating, the catastrophizing. Instead, I had slept 7 hours and woken with a clarity that felt almost architectural, everything in its place, everything accounted for. I had done the work. The work was in the binders Karen was carrying in a structured bag by her left side. All that remained was to let it speak. The deposition was conducted by Karen and covered, in sequence, the business finances, the history of our joint accounts, and the specific financial transfers from my accounts to the business during the deficit years of 2013 through 2016. Daniel's answers in the first 20 minutes were measured. His attorney had prepared him well. He acknowledged the transfers but characterized them as informal loans repaid through household contributions, a construction so legally nebulous it was almost artistic. When Karen asked him to specify the form of repayment, he said the repayments had been in kind, meaning, he implied, through his labor in maintaining the household. Karen let that sit for a moment. The court reporter typed. The silence in the room had texture. Then she placed a binder on the table, tabbed, indexed, organized in the way that documents prepared to be taken apart in sequence are organized. The first tab was the bank records, 14 months of transfers, dated and itemized, totaling $68,000, moved from my personal account into the Harman & Green business account between January 2013 and April 2015. Amounts I had documented from our archived records, which I had been meticulous about maintaining because I am, at core, a project manager and project managers archive. Mr. Harman, Karen said, in 2013, when your business was operating at a deficit, your wife transferred funds from her personal account to your business account on 14 separate occasions. Is that correct? Yes, he said. She was supporting the business. As an investment or as a loan? We were married. It was household funds. Her personal account, Mr. Harman, not the joint account. Her personal account, funded by her salary. Are you characterizing money from her personal account as household funds? Brackett put a hand on Daniel's arm. You can answer. We commingled, Daniel started. The accounts are separate and documentably distinct, Karen said. She turned to the second tab. The second tab was Roy Finch's business appraisal. $112,000 supported by methodology, comparable sales data, and an itemized asset list that included the vehicle fleet, the equipment, and the existing client contracts. Contracts, several of which Daniel had obtained using leads developed during a period when my income was subsidizing his operating costs. Your attorney's submission valued Harman & Green at $40,000, Karen said. A certified independent appraiser has assessed it at $112,000. Can you explain the discrepancy? Daniel looked at the document, then at Brackett, then back at the document. Equipment depreciates, he said. The appraiser accounted for depreciation, Karen said. The difference is accounted for by client contract value. Did you omit that from your valuation? I didn't. My accountant. Did you instruct your accountant regarding the valuation? I provided information. Did you tell your accountant to exclude the client contract roster from the valuation? There was a silence that lasted approximately 4 seconds, which is a very long time in a conference room. I gave him the information I had, Daniel said finally. His voice had changed register, not dramatically. Daniel was not a dramatic man, and even under pressure he did not raise his voice or gesture widely. But the register had dropped, flattened, in the specific way of someone who is working very hard to keep something contained and is beginning to feel the effort of it. I had heard that voice before. Once, years ago, when he'd made a significant business mistake and had to explain it to a client on a phone call while I sat in the next room and pretended not to listen. The voice of a man recalculating. Karen moved to the third tab. The photographs, the timeline, the cross-references. She didn't use them emotionally, she used them legally to establish that Daniel had made specific factual representations to me about his whereabouts on specific dates, and that those representations were demonstrably false during the same period in which he was asking me to sign a settlement agreement he was simultaneously misrepresenting in financial terms. Pattern of material misrepresentation, Karen said quietly, more to the court reporter than to anyone else. Daniel's composure came apart in increments rather than all at once. By the third tab, he had stopped looking at me. By the questions about the employer call, the false statements to Paul Gessner, he was rubbing the side of his thumb against the table edge, a tic I recognized from years of watching him under stress. Brackett interjected more frequently. The interjections told me everything. They They told me Brackett was no longer managing a confident client. He was performing damage control. There was a moment. It came during a question about a specific Thursday evening in November. One of the nights he had told me he was meeting a client in Riverside. When Daniel looked up from the table and his eyes met mine for the first time that morning. I don't know what he was looking for. Mercy, maybe. Or perhaps just acknowledgement. The confirmation that I saw him, that I knew, that we both understood what was happening in this room. I held his gaze without expression. I was not angry. I was not satisfied. I was simply present, completely and steadily present, in a way I think he had perhaps not expected from me. He looked away first. We broke for 15 minutes at 11 o'clock. Karen and I stood in the hallway. "He's not going to go further with the custody threat," she said quietly. "Not after this morning." "You're sure?" The employer call alone opens him to defamation exposure. The business valuation discrepancy opens him to fraud claims in the settlement negotiation. He has very little leverage left. She paused. "He knows that now." I looked down the hallway. Beige carpet, a framed landscape print, a water fountain with an out-of-order sign. Ordinary. Completely ordinary. "Okay," I said. "How are you doing?" "I'm fine," I said. And I was. I was completely, precisely fine. Not numb, not suppressed, but genuinely steady in the way that I think comes only when you have done the preparation, and the preparation has held. We went back in. Brackett called Karen the following Thursday. He didn't call to threaten. He called to negotiate, which is a very different posture, and one that told me everything about how the deposition had landed on their side of the table. Daniel's legal position, as Karen had assessed it post-deposition, had narrowed considerably. The employer defamation exposure was real. The business valuation discrepancy, now formally documented in deposition testimony, created a fraud in settlement risk that Brackett clearly did not want to take before a judge. The custody threat, floated informally and never formalized, had been quietly withdrawn, mentioned nowhere in any subsequent communication. I thought about that Thursday evening in November. The one Karen had asked Daniel about directly, the one where he had looked up and met my eyes across the table and found nothing there he could use. I thought about how the machinery of consequence works, slowly, without drama, through documentation and patience, and the simple refusal to be hurried into signing something before you understand what it says. Karen and Brackett spoke for 90 minutes. She called me at the end of the afternoon. "They're willing to settle," she said. "They want to avoid trial." "What are they offering?" She walked me through it. The house would be sold with 60% of the net proceeds going to me, this accounting for the documented financial contributions during the deficit years, which were now formally established rather than argued. The joint savings account would be divided 65 to 35 in my favor, reflecting the same calculation. Harmon and Green would be valued for settlement purposes at $90,000. Still below Finch's appraisal, but a negotiated compromise, and my share of that valuation was included. The fictitious 2016 loan claim was withdrawn entirely and would not appear in any final documentation. Daniel would retain the business and its liabilities. I would retain my 401k in full. Child custody was joint, with primary residence with me, standard visitation schedule, and child support calculated on our respective incomes. "Karen," I said. "Yes." "Is this everything we argued for?" "Not everything. The business valuation is below Finch. But realistically, Claire, taking this to trial to close that gap, is $90,000 a fair reflection of the documented evidence?" She paused. "It's a defensible settlement. What we've achieved here is substantially better than what he originally proposed." I thought about the kitchen table in February, the manila envelope. You won't get anything. I thought about the stationery from Vermont and the handwritten note and the way he had used Lily's name as a pressure point and the phone call to Paul Gessner and the voicemail where he had lost his composure and then apologized for losing it while still meaning every word. I thought about the cloud backup folder and the 17 photographs and the way the timestamps had told a cleaner, more honest story than anything he had said to me in months. "Take it," I said. The settlement was signed in Karen's conference room on a gray Tuesday in April. Not the same conference room as the deposition, a smaller one 2 floors up, with a window that looked onto a courtyard where someone had planted early spring flowers I didn't recognize. Crocuses, I thought, or something like them. Small and purple and entirely indifferent to what was happening 2 floors above them. Daniel and I were not in the same room for the signing. Karen handled our side. Brackett handled his. The documents moved between floors by messenger, which felt appropriately final, a physical separation matching the legal one. When the last page was in front of me, I held the pen for a moment. I was not performing anything. There was no one in the room who needed to see a gesture. Karen was reviewing her copy. The paralegal was time-stamping pages. The moment was mine entirely, which meant I could be honest in it. I thought about the first documents he had slid across our kitchen table. I thought about how certain he had been, how settled it had seemed to him, how complete. Him walking away with the business he'd built on foundations I'd helped pour. Me left with a fraction of what was mine, grateful, presumably, for the clean escape. I thought about the smile I had given him then, the quiet, knowing smile that had unsettled him, the one I hadn't entirely planned, but which had turned out to be the most accurate thing I'd expressed in that entire encounter. He had wanted me to fold. He had structured everything. The timing, the language, the false loan, the understated valuation, the appeal to dignity, the threat, the handwritten note on Vermont stationery, around the assumption that I would fold. That assumption had been his only real strategic error, and it had been, in the end, a very expensive one. I signed. My signature was the same as it always was, unhurried, legible, the kind of signature that comes from someone who signs a lot of documents professionally and has never bothered to make it dramatic. I signed every page. Karen called me that evening to confirm it was complete. "It's done," she said. "Thank you," I said. I meant it in a way that didn't need elaboration. I made dinner. Lily set the table. Biscuit got underfoot in the way that made us both laugh. Outside, it was still light at 7 o'clock, the first evening of the year where you could feel the season actually turning. The particular quality of April light that is different from March light, warmer and more certain, like a decision that has finally been made. I had not won a war. I want to be precise about that. I had protected what was mine, secured what I had built, and prevented a man who believed I would not push back from discovering he was right. That is not the same as war. That is just not losing when you didn't have to. The house on Mercer Lane sold in June. I had expected to feel worse about it than I did. I had planted things in that yard. I had repainted those rooms. But when I walked through it one last time, after the furniture was gone, after Biscuit had done a confused, comprehensive sniff of every empty corner, I felt mostly just finished. Not sad. Finished. I bought a smaller house 6 miles away, in a neighborhood with good schools and a park 2 blocks from the front door. It had 3 bedrooms, original hardwood floors, and a kitchen with a window over the sink that caught the morning light in a way that made me. The first morning, I stood there with coffee, exhale in a way I hadn't in months. Lily chose the paint color for her bedroom. She chose a deep teal that I would not have chosen, which meant it was exactly right. The architectural firm promoted me to associate director in September, a title I had been the informal version of for 2 years without the accompanying salary. The divorce had, unexpectedly, made me sharper at work, not because trauma made me better, but because the process of managing it had forced me to become extremely clear about what I was willing to accept and what I was not. That clarity turned out to be professionally useful. Through Deborah and through the quiet grapevine that exists in any social community, I learned what happened on the other side. Daniel and Mara moved in together in June, into an apartment near the highway, a significant step down from Mercer Lane. The landscaping business had a difficult summer. 2 major clients whose contracts Roy Finch had appraised did not renew, and by fall, Daniel had taken on a part-time bookkeeping job to supplement the business income. I did not feel triumphant about this. His difficulties were the natural result of his own decisions, the valuation he'd tried to misrepresent, the financial position he'd negotiated himself into by trying to undercut mine. I hadn't engineered any of it. I had simply refused to subsidize it any further. By November, Mara had apparently discovered that the version of Daniel she had met at a trade expo, the one with the house in a good neighborhood, the impression of financial solidity, was not entirely the same man she was now splitting utilities with. I felt something when I heard this. Not satisfaction, more like the closing of a logical argument, the sense of a proof resolving to its natural conclusion. Rachel came to visit in October. We opened a bottle of wine and sat on the back porch of the new house, and I told her the whole story from beginning to end. She listened without interrupting. "You scared me," she said when I finished. "I know." "Not because I thought you'd lose, because I know what it costs you to run at that pitch for that long." I looked at the yard. Smaller than the old yard, a blank slate. Next spring, I was going to plant things. "I'm okay," I said, and I was, in the way that is different from fine. Not a performance, but a genuine assessment. Lily asked me once, in December, if I was happy. I thought about it seriously, the way she deserved. "Yes," I said, "I am." She nodded with the gravity of a 12-year-old who has been through something and come out wanting things to be true. "Good," she said. And then she went back to her book about coral reefs. He told me I wouldn't get anything. He was wrong. Not because I was lucky, but because I didn't sign anything I hadn't read, didn't surrender anything I hadn't verified, and didn't mistake composure for defeat. The lesson isn't about divorce. It's about knowing your own value clearly enough that no one else's assessment of it can move you. What would you have done, sitting at that kitchen table with that envelope in front of you? I'd love to know. Leave a comment. And if this story stayed with you, subscribe. There are more of them. Thank you for being here.